Okay, but so ladies, you have a presentation for us. You have some tips on insurance and you have the information that everyone is looking for. So we can go ahead and get started if you want to pull up your screen. And if you are joining us live on Facebook right now, thank you so much for joining us. I am here with Amanda Kugler and Stephanie Goodman of Bricks and Mortar Cannabis Insurance. And today we are talking about understanding your insurance coverage and choices. This is something that we all need to know. We all are seeking different businesses in the cannabis industry. Some of us are touching the plants. Some of us are not. Either way, we need to have insurance to protect our businesses and what we have built.
Absolutely. So we're really going to touch here on the 5 licenses within the state and what the insurance requirements are from the state, and also the insurance that we would recommend as an insurance advisor for the licensees. We are more than happy to discuss some of the ancillary businesses as well, but this presentation is really geared for those applying for one of the 5 licenses.
Well, that just tells me that's another topic we're going to have to talk about in the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. We all need insurance, even us. You know, our E&O was a special, different type of policy because we are working in the industry versus a standard E&O policy for another insurance agency that's not working in the cannabis realm.
Right. All right. Well, thank you.
No problem. You want us to jump in then?
Yeah, go ahead and jump on in.
Perfect. So like Jamie said, we're going to be touching on the insurance coverage and choices that you have. Our website is down here, www.bricksmortarcannabis.com. We've got lots of great insurance and real estate information on the website. So after the presentation, feel free to jump on the website to get a little bit more information. So first we wanted to jump into what the ordinance or what the rules say from the state of Michigan. So of Rule 10, proof of financial responsibility, they talk about proof of financial responsibility for liability for bodily injury on the form prescribed in Section 408 for the amount of $100,000, no less than. I'm going to jump into the next piece that they require. Oh, 1 second, sorry. Oh boy.
You know, live broadcasting, you know, I came from a live television world, so I totally get it. We are very patient people, and I'm sure we have a very patient audience. I also want to encourage you, if you have questions, we will be taking questions as we move through the presentation. So make sure if you can ask them. There's a Q&A feature. If you are joining us by webinar, there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining us from Facebook, all you have to do is type in the comments, ask your questions, and give us some time, but we will get to them. Even if we move to a different topic, we will get to your questions, and we have plenty of time.
Awesome. All right, we should be good now. The second rule is the premise liability and casualty insurance for no less than $100,000. And the third rule really speaks to the secure transporter, where they would have to have proof of auto insurance. Now, we understand that the rules that came out were very confusing, and even Stephanie and I, who read rules all day long, were a little confused by the wording. So what does this mean for applicants? We're going to break it down so that everyone can understand it. So for cultivators, processors, provisioning centers, and labs, what the state is requiring is $100,000 in product liability coverage. Now, they've given you a couple different options to satisfy that requirement. The first is through a standard product liability insurance policy. The second option was to have cash in an account held, like an escrow account, with $100,000 just sitting there for product liability coverage. The third option was in the form of a bond, and you'll see there's some asterisks there, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that bond requirement later in the presentation. The second piece that was required for cultivators, processors, provisioning centers, and labs was $100,000 in general liability coverage, which is pretty standard to require a business to have general liability. $100,000 is low, but it is a requirement by most businesses. For secure transporters, From the rules that we read, obviously they are required to have a commercial auto policy. That is a requirement. We also read it that they would be required to also carry a general liability policy and a product liability policy, because they would be also touching that product while it's in the course of transport. So that's what the conversations we're having with our clients. And that's pretty much all the attorneys that we're talking to read the rules the same way. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
No.
Okay. So let's jump into the first requirement, which was product liability. So we're going to give you a brief overview of what product liability insurance is. It protects the manufacturer, distributor, or seller of a product from legal liability resulting from a defective condition that caused personal injury or damage associated with the use of the product. Lots of words there. I don't typically like to read slides, but that's the definition of what property liability insurance is.
Product liability.
Product liability. Thanks, Stephanie.
And transporters should have been in there too, since right before that you said they have to carry it.
Yeah, you know, we have a lot of conversations with transporters. Some are saying they don't need to carry that. Some are seeing that they do. The rules were very vague from the state of Michigan, and so we're erring on the safe side. If you're touching the product in any way, shape, or form, you need protection. So that's the stance that we're taking. Our client, we're not, forcing our clients to take anything, but we're basing it on what we read in the rules, and that's what we saw.
Yeah, you don't want to be in a position where you transported a product and then they're saying, well, it got contaminated on the way to the dispensary. It was not. So depending on how it's packaged and different things, there's a different amount of risk, but that's still something that you definitely want to consider for your business, because you are taking on, if there's a lawsuit because of that product hurting somebody, you could be pulled into that. So it's definitely better to err on the side of caution, like Amanda said.
Right. Thank you very much for clarifying that.
No problem. So the second option that they gave to satisfy that product liability rule was a surety bond. Now, I'm going to touch briefly on surety bonds, and you're going to see the last point here. A surety bond is a contract between three parties. So it's going to be the principal, which is you as the business owner, the surety, which is the carrier that's actually writing the bond, and the obligee, and that's the entity that's requiring the bond. So in this example, it would be the state of Michigan. Now, they're not requiring it. They're giving you an option to satisfy the product liability with a bond, but they would be the obligee in this scenario. And basically, the surety financially guarantees to the state of Michigan in this example that the principal, business owner, will act in accordance with the terms established by the bond. Okay. For example, some states like California, they're requiring a bond and insurance. So you don't get the choice of one or the other. You have to buy insurance, you have to buy a bond. Michigan is not requiring a bond. They're giving you the opportunity to purchase bond or product liability insurance or an escrow account. But one of the things that I like to emphasize to everyone that we talk to is a bond is not an insurance policy. If there's an issue and a claim arises and the bond company gets notification that there is a claim, the bond company is not just paying it and you're good to go like an insurance policy. The bond company is going to reach out to the principal, ask them if they want the bond company to pay the claim, and after that, they are going to collect against the principal. So the principal is going to pay regardless. Now, I did want to mention, Jamie, since the last time that we presented at your licensing boot camp, we have found out that there aren't markets that are issuing bonds for the state of Michigan to satisfy this requirement. They're issuing city bonds. So like City of Lansing is requiring a bond, City of Hazel Park is requiring a bond, but there are no bond companies that are offering bonds for the product liability.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So unfortunately, bonding is not an opportunity to satisfy the product liability requirement.
Do you think that will change over time? Somebody's going to start offering that? Is that an opportunity?
I don't think so. It's a lot to ask a bond company to step in and take on this type of financial guarantee. So basically, they would have to be financially guaranteeing that there's not going to be a product liability issue. And as we're seeing, the more and more states that unroll these programs, there's going to be product liability claims. There's no question about it. People are going to consume a product. It's going to make them sick. It's going to make them do something that they don't think that they wanted to or that they should have. And so it's just a lot of risk for the bond companies. So in this scenario, I don't know if a bond company will come in and step in and take on that risk for the product liability.
Right. Okay. Wow.
So yeah, I just want to emphasize bonds are being issued for municipalities that are requiring it, but there aren't bond companies that are issuing it for the state product liability requirement.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So since product liability is such a big issue, I wanted to touch in on a little bit more on product liability. So it is protection for the manufacturer, distributor, and retailer from claims related to products that they sell. Okay, this is going to cover injury arising from the use of cannabis. Some policies even include coverage for accidental contamination, mislabeling, and recalls. So it's important that you check your policy that you purchase to see if those things are covered. Some are covering them, some are not covering them. And Stephanie and I believe that this is one of the most important coverages for our clients, and we'll get into a little bit reason why next. So $876,000, what does this mean? Basically, the Insurance Information Institute is saying that that's the average cost of defense of a product liability claim. Not payout, not someone got sick, this is what we paid to that sick person. This is the defense costs alone. I'm gonna play a quick video, hopefully. Can you hear that?
In 2014, Christine Kirk was killed by her husband after he ate edible marijuana. Kirk's family believes marijuana companies should be blamed for the incident because there were no warning labels on the package. Therefore, Kirk's family has filed a lawsuit against two major edible marijuana companies. According to experts, the edible marijuana companies may claim that outside factors influenced the murder of Christine Kirk. Examples would be either financial issues or marital problems.
So with that video, basically what it's saying is, yes, there was a product liability lawsuit. It happened. Regardless of the outcome, there's still going to be defense costs associated with that lawsuit. So there was a wrongful death lawsuit filed against the manufacturer and the distributor in that case. So regardless of if they found that there were outside reasons why that death happened, it doesn't matter. There was still a lawsuit and there's still going to be costs associated with that lawsuit. And one of the great benefits of having a product liability policy is defense costs are included in that. While it does eat up the benefit, so if you have $100,000, defense costs aren't going to be covered that much. It's only going to be covered for $100,000. At least there's some defense costs included in that.
Right, right. Okay. Okay. Thank you for sharing that video too, and sharing that specific. This is news that we see all the time. You know, right. People that are. But that's why we have seed to sale tracking, and you know we know how to track some of that product down. But this was the outside. You know, they were trying to use outside sources. So,
right.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Next up, we wanted to jump into the general liability, but there may be product liability questions that come up. We'd be happy to answer them either now or after the presentation. We're also going to give our email and phone numbers out. So if there's any questions that you want to ask privately, feel free to reach out to us. So the second requirement for the licensees was the general liability coverage. And essentially what this is it's going to cover third-party lawsuits over bodily injuries and property damage. A third party is anyone other than the insured's employees. So the biggest thing that we're seeing right now with general liability policies is that standard general liability policies contain exclusions for any Schedule I substance, a banned substance, or other substances that constitute a health hazard, okay? So that's why it's very important that you are honest, number one, with your insurance agent and insurance company about the work that you're doing, because the last thing that anyone would want to have happen is a general or a claim happen and it not to be covered because you were not insured properly. Okay, so you can't be insured by a standard, for example, like a Hartford or a Travelers for general liability. They will not cover this because of the Schedule I substance or the illegal substance in the eyes of the federal government. Here are some examples, and I thought this was really interesting because you're going to see some sample insurance policies of exclusions for smoking products, for health hazards. As you can see in the second one here, it talks about exclusions for cannabis, cigarettes, e-cigarettes, tobacco. So you want to make sure, I'm putting all this out there because you want to make sure that you're reading your policies and you're working with an insurance agent, an agency that understands the policies that they're writing. And I'm not saying anything bad about other insurance agents, because there are a lot of great insurance agents out there that understand and read their policies. But if you're not working with an agency that specializes in this and understands the products and policies that they're writing, you may very well have this exclusion in your policy. So you're paying insurance premiums and you're not going to have any coverage. Here's another one, another exclusion related to marijuana. And this is in a policy that's written here in Michigan. They're attaching this to the policy, basically stating that if it's marijuana related, there isn't that exclusion. And I just wanted to emphasize again, work with carriers that do not exclude marijuana, work with insurance agencies that understand the policies that they're issuing, and ultimately read your policy. They're not fun, they'll put you to sleep, but you need to read your policy and make sure that you're protecting yourself as well.
Absolutely. I mean, just like if we were buying insurance for cars, it's just you need to read the policy and really understand it and
yeah, absolutely.
how it's going to protect you.
So, all right, let's jump into the commercial auto now. So basically this is coverage for vehicles responsible for the secure transportation of the product. It's mandated for all secure transportation businesses. So they're all required to have commercial auto coverage. The big thing that we're talking to all of our secure transporters about is not only do you need coverage for your vehicle, unfortunately, and that's going to include liability, physical damage, and medical coverage, but you are also going to be responsible for the stock and cash in transit. And that's something that's not addressed in the state rules. And it's something that we're bringing to attention to a lot of people that we're talking about is that is essentially going to be your responsibility, is making sure that the items that you're transporting are insured by you while they're in your possession. And then you also want to make sure that if you're making any alterations to the vehicles, that is covered. And if you have an armored vehicle, we want to make sure that that's disclosed as well, so that way you can have proper coverage in the event that there is a claim. Other policies required by the state that are not in the emergency rules. Workers' compensation, that's a big one. So with everything that's happening in the state right now, there's a lot of talk about the commercial general liability, the product liability, the commercial auto, but these are all going to be businesses that are up and operating and having employees. And the number one policy that the state requires in the event that you have employees working for you is workers' compensation.
And this is any business, not just marijuana businesses.
Correct. Basically, workers' compensation serves two purposes. It assures that injured workers get medical care and compensation for a portion of their income that they lose while they're unable to work. And it protects employers from lawsuits by their workers that are injured while working. And employees will receive benefits regardless of who's at fault. So if they do something silly and they cut their finger off while trimming, it doesn't matter. They're still going to receive medical care and compensation for the income that they've lost. So a couple of things that I want to mention that you want to talk to your insurance agencies about as you're going through the workers' compensation purchasing process. You want to have a clear definition of what your employees are doing, because the premium is based on the payroll of each class of business. So if you've got a receptionist who's just, welcoming people in, you're going to pay a different premium for that person than you are the person who is doing the trimming or is even selling the product. That's going to be a different class code than a receptionist. Same thing with managers. They're going to have a different class code based on what they're doing. So it's very important to have clear definitions of the payroll amount that you have for each class of business. And again, there's a huge emphasis on being accurate, because what's going to happen is at the end of the year, you're going to get an audit and you're going to have to go through and list all your payrolls by class. And if you say that you had $100,000 in clerical work, so people doing office stuff, and it ends up you had $100,000 in cultivation or agriculture, you're going to see an increase in premium, and you're going to have to pay that on the spot, and you're going to have to pay it for the next year too. So you could end up seeing a nice big audit if we're not accurate in the class codes. And we want to emphasize that if you have safety programs in place, such as safety manuals, workplace regulations, and preventative measures, those can all count towards discounts on your policy. So it's really important that you not only implement them for your own business and your employees' sake, but also for your work comp premiums. And finally, Michigan requires work comp, or there's fines. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that because this is huge. In Michigan, the employer may be subject to a fine of $1,000 or imprisonment for no less than 30 days, no more than 6 months, or both. And I want to emphasize that each day that the employer is uninsured is considered a separate offense.
Woo!
Yeah, big fines. And unfortunately, this is an industry that's going to be under scrutiny. So if we're not following the rules in the industry, there's a very good chance that the state's going to be keeping an eye on that. So it's very, very important that you follow the rules and you carry the work comp and you don't let it lapse, and you don't really go a day with having an employee working without having this benefit there for your employees. The state's going to make sure that that doesn't happen. Some coverages that we recommend. So this is things that we're talking to all of our clients about. What we're seeing in terms of the process right now is a lot of our clients are purchasing the general liability, the product liability, and the commercial auto for the secured transporters to satisfy what the state's requiring to get their license. And then as they're getting licensed, that's when we start talking about all these other ancillary business or ancillary coverages. So a lot of our clients aren't purchasing property coverage yet because they're not up and operating. But we do find these to be obviously very, very important. And it's going to really play a part once you get that license. So we're going to go into detail and talk about all these things. So first and foremost is property. This covers property that is owned or leased by the business. This can include building, equipment, furniture, computers, betterments or improvements. And betterments or improvements, here's a good example. You lease a big warehouse, okay? And part of your lease contract is that you are required, or you're responsible for the build out. So let's say, just throwing out random numbers here, you lease a building and you put $100,000 in a build out. You want to make sure that that build out is insured, because if there's a fire, the landlord is going to rebuild the building, but you're going to have to do the build out again. So that build out would fall under the tenants, betterments, or improvements coverage. And again, with this property coverage, it's important that you are in a policy that's going to cover marijuana or cannabis businesses. Okay.
Look for the exclusion. Look for the exclusion.
Correct. And you want to make sure, again, I know I'm like nailing this in, but you want to make sure that you're working with an agency that understands that. Traditional insurers cannot cover property that is being used for marijuana. We talk to clients all the time. Well, yeah, I've got a policy. Okay, who's your carrier? And you find out who the carrier is. And I'm like, you don't have a policy. You might be paying premium, but there's no coverage there. So that's the last thing that we want to have happen, is for you to be paying premiums, there to be a claim, and you not to have coverage. That's worst case scenario, in my opinion.
Right.
To touch on the property a little bit too, your location matters. So when you're looking for a property to lease, if you're looking in like Detroit versus Ann Arbor, get quotes on that before you lease it. So you might think you have this great deal, but your insurance could be way higher because of the area that you're in. So this is definitely something, get it quoted before you buy a property, just so you know what you're getting into.
That's a great tip, because I don't think that, obviously people aren't really thinking about that until they are thinking about submitting their application. And, I mean, there has to be that line of communication before you buy the property. I mean, and for instance, I just heard from the electrical department yesterday, Consumers Energy, saying that we need communication with license seekers before they acquire a property too. So, talk to your insurance company, you guys, and then talk to the electrical company. There's a lot that you need to be thinking about before you put that money down on those properties.
Right. Yep. That's a great point by Stephanie. I was talking to a client just this morning, and she said she was referring us a client for insurance, and they're in Detroit, but they don't tell anyone what they do because they know that if they tell people what they do, they'll get broken into. And I'm like, yeah, that's not a good sign of where you're located, So that is a great point that Stephanie makes, is that those things matter, especially on the insurance end. They want to know that all the precautions are taking place. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit here, because there are requirements in terms of what you need to do to protect your building and your property and the stuff located in your property if you want them insured.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask that, is like, how far in do they talk about security in these policies?
They talk about a lot, and I have it all listed. And again, on the property side, we also want to mention that we do have policies for building owners. And this is what we do a ton of work for on the insurance end, is people who own the building, they need that building insured, and then they're leasing it out to cultivators, provisioning centers, you name it. Again, standard policies, even if you're just the landlord and you're leasing that space out. The second that the traditional insurance company finds out that that's what you're doing, or that's what your tenant was doing in the space, there's no coverage. So you need to be really careful in this aspect, even on the lesser's risks or the building owners.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And I just wanted to mention some of the property endorsements that are available, depending on the company that you go with. They will provide coverage for equipment breakdown. So if you have a piece of equipment that breaks down, if it's caused by a covered loss, they would replace that equipment. Money and securities. So there's limits on how much coverage would be provided in the event that you have got cash on hand or any other type of money on hand. If there's stolen or if there's another covered loss, they do have money and security limits within their policy. Spoilage is also a big one for some people. Depending on what they're doing, spoilage could play a big part in that. Employee dishonesty is another big one. If you've got an employee that's stealing from you, there's usually a supplement that's built into the policy to cover that. Ordinance and law is another good one. Basically, if you have a building that there's a partial loss and there is a building with a partial loss, and they come in and they say that this part of the building was not up to code, we need to bring it back up to code, the insurance company is not going to pay for the remainder of the building that was not destroyed to be brought up to code as well. So this usually gives a percentage of the total building value to have that other part of the building that was not destroyed brought up to code. Finished stock in transit, that's another good one. Basically, it's small limits. It's usually $25,000 per occurrence. We can get higher limits for secure transporters, but that is one area that is included in the property endorsement. And then sewer backup. For some people, they were devastated back in 2014 when all the sewer backup claims happened in Metro Detroit. And there are sublimits, depending on the carrier that you're with. It could be $25,000, $50,000 in the event that there is sewage backup and you're storing things in your basement and they're ruined.
Okay, and then I wanted to ask, what happens if the electricity goes down? I mean, we are in Michigan. There are ice storms, snowstorms, there are wind storms that sometimes knock out power, and maybe there's not an establishment doesn't have a generator in place to kind of help when that happens. Like although you should, what happens? What does that fall under?
So that's going to be loss of income. So business loss of income, and you need to make sure that you're speaking directly with your carriers to make sure that power outage and utilities are going to be covered. That's not typically covered under the base business loss of income. So that's an endorsement that you'd have to add to the policy to have that coverage.
We usually ask too, do you have a generator because of that exact issue? If your lights go out for a week, then you lose your whole crop.
Right, that could be devastating to a small business.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So excess liability, that is basically an umbrella policy, and it's going to sit above and beyond your underlying limits to give you an excess amount of liability coverage. It's not any broader than the underlying policies. So the sole purpose is to provide additional limits of insurance. And there are limits of up to $10 million available currently. This is another one, a big one that we talk about on a regular basis is crop insurance. Biggest question we usually get is, wow, you have crop insurance? Yes, we do have a crop insurance policy that we can write. It's specifically designed to cover indoor plants that are not harvested yet and are lost or damaged due to a covered peril. The next question usually is, what's a covered peril? So we've listed out here what their crop insurance policies typically cover. And I want to mention that this is all carrier based. So it's not just blanket, this is what all of them cover. But it typically covers fire, lightning, explosion, windstorm or hail, smoke, riot, water damage, or theft.
I do not see mites on the list.
Oh, let's go to the next page.
Oh.
Exclusions.
Oh.
Yeah, disease, insect, rot, not covered. Fungi, bacterial, mold, not covered. Utility services, not covered.
Governmental action, you get raided, it is not covered.
Correct. So the biggest thing that we talk about, because people are upset about this is not government backed, obviously, versus the standard crop insurance policy that you normally see. So they've provided a limited crop insurance policy to cover some of the basic perils of loss that you'll see, but is not an all-inclusive list. Hopefully, eventually, one day we can get there, but we're not there yet.
So
we can
do
cover
our
greenhouse. If the product is inside of a greenhouse, if you're growing in a greenhouse, we cannot cover outdoor either. There is nobody that will cover outdoor crop right now.
Oh, okay. And then, so what does the policy that you would see for maybe hops look similar to this, or does the policy for cannabis look completely different?
It looks completely different.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a whole, this is cannabis specific. And they've looked at their limited amount of data that they've had. I think it's for the past 10 years maybe that they've been writing insurance policies. And they've tried their best to come up with a plan that will cover some of the most likely losses and still make it affordable. If we wanted them to cover all of these things, bacteria, disease, insect, people couldn't afford it, because it just wouldn't make sense financially for the insurance companies to insure that. The premium that they would have to charge to cover all the losses would be astronomical.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, that's the crop insurance. The next big one that we talk about is finished stock. It covers the product the business has on the premises to sell to its customers. It's just extremely important with high value items such as cannabis. So we stop into some of our provisioning center clients and we see what they have on display and in their facility. And there's a lot of money there. It's very, very valuable for some of these facilities. So because of that, most carriers do require a certain vault or safe requirement and secured inventory after hours, so once they're closed, to prevent any type of loss. And we'll go into that here. So here's just an example. There's a lot of information here. I don't normally like to put this many words on a slide, but I wanted to get it out there that this is just an example of some finished stock security requirements. So almost all insurance companies are going to require a locked 700 pound or greater safe, and they want that bolted to the floor. A central burglar alarm system. Fire alarm would be phenomenal as well, but burglar is required. And it must be on every single door or window. No questions asked. And some people might be asking, well, how's the insurance company going to know? Anytime that we're insuring any type of property, crop, finished stock, equipment, they are going to do an inspection. So you're going to have to make sure that the alarm is covering all windows, all doors, functioning motion detectors. It needs to be a very elaborate alarm. And additionally, the alarm has to be on. So if you have a claim where someone breaks in the middle of the night, just because you had an alarm, if it's not set, there's a really good chance that the insurance company's not going to pay out. So that should be part of your SOP, making sure that the alarm and the closing procedures are in place.
That's what I was thinking. People are going to need to talk to you guys or before they start working with their security professional, because you're going to have to see what's required in your policy and communicate to that person who is building your security plan.
Yep. And we work closely with some security companies on building that plan. A lot of them want to see the requirements that the insurance companies are putting in place, and we've got no problem sharing this information with them. We all want our clients to have the best coverage out there and to make sure that they are going to be covered in the event of a claim.
Well, I'm going to nudge our other founding member, Ted Daniels, to make sure that he continues a relationship with you ladies.
I like it.
Okay.
Another good one here is during business hours, all stock not on display for sale must be kept in a locked safe with the same requirements as during non-business hours. So they don't want a whole bunch of stock just laying around even during business hours. And then they do require written records of all purchases of stock, but that's required by the state of Michigan. So that should be hand in hand with what the state is requiring. Another good one that we're talking to as our clients start to hire employees is employment practices liability. And what this does is it provides coverage for the business for discrimination. So whether you're discriminating on sex, race, age, disability, it's also going to provide coverage for the business in the event that there's a wrongful termination lawsuit, a sexual harassment lawsuit, or failure to promote. All of those employment practices would be covered in the event of a lawsuit. So that's a nice endorsement, and it's not an expensive endorsement. The next one is E&O and professional liability. I mentioned that at the beginning of the presentation. We have an E&O policy for us. Basically, it's going to cover any alleged or actual negligence. It is going to include defense costs. It also includes personal injury, so libel, slander, copyright infringement, and it provides worldwide coverage. So what this basically covers is liability in the act of your profession. So if you are a provisioning center and you've got bud tenders who are out giving professional advice to their patients, a professional liability would be extremely important in that scenario. Because if they tell a client that they need to take this dosage and the client gets sick or there's an issue based on the information that your bud tender gave, that's not going to be a general liability or product liability claim. That's going to be a professional liability claim.
Great to know. That is very good to know, because I think that's something that does happen often is the bud tenders are giving, are found giving a little bit more advice than probably the establishment would be comfortable with, and so you need to have this to make sure that you're protected from that.
Absolutely. Just want to touch on what it does not cover. It does not cover bodily injury or property damage. That's going to be your general liability policy. It does not cover fraudulent acts. So if you intentionally commit fraud, yeah. Mm-hmm. Employment matters, not covered. That's going to be either your EPLI or your employee benefits liability policy. Any type of false advertising, not going to be covered. And patents and trade secrets are not covered under this policy either.
Can you explain the copyright infringement?
Yeah, it's basically if there is some type of copyright, as long as it wasn't intentionally committed, it would fall under this.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know, because there are some cannabis companies that are dealing with those battles.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. So the biggest thing is you just want to make sure that it was not fraudulent or it was not intentional, and you also want to make sure that your E&O policy does not exclude that. So every E&O policy is different. And again, I'm going to go back to what I said in the previous slides. Make sure to read your policy, because every company will have a list of exclusions, and you just want to make sure that, the things that you're thinking are covered are actually covered.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Directors and officers, also known as D&O coverage. We're seeing this a lot for those big companies, big investors that are coming in and investing money into the industry, and maybe they have a board of directors. This would be a great policy for them. It covers claims resulting from managerial decisions that have adverse financial consequences. So for some of your smaller businesses, you probably don't have a board of directors, you don't have the officers. I mean, you may, but this is really important for those businesses who are coming in and they're larger and they do have a board of directors, and the decisions that that board makes, if they've got a financial impact and there's a negative impact, this would be a great policy to make sure that they're covered. This is another one that I really enjoy talking to my clients about, is the cyber liability coverage. And I enjoy it so much because a lot of people don't understand, a lot of business owners don't understand the impact that this policy has, or their risks that they have. This is designed to help organizations mitigate costs involving recovery after a cyber-related security breach. So the best way I can describe this is a provisioning center. If you are collecting your patient's information and storing it into your database or your software system, if there is a security breach and that information is leaked or is hacked, there could be a huge lawsuit that follows. And the only way to have that coverage is to have a cyber liability policy. And so we ask all of our provisioning centers, are you going to be storing any customer information, whether that's personal information? I know that they're probably collecting my ID, and they're going to take my name and my address and my date of birth and my driver's license number. Are you collecting any online payment information? We may or may not be there yet, but are you storing any of that information into the cloud so that it can be hacked? You know, these are the things that we want to talk to our clients about and see if there's an exposure, because we have a product that's out there that can help mitigate that risk.
Okay, and so what if so if you're using a third party, you're using an app, you know, like Baker Technologies, if you guys are familiar with that, where they have the iPad and it collects all the information. They're the ones, their platform is the one collecting all the information. Is that covered?
So I would want to see what your contract with them says, because chances are you're going to be held liable as the business owner as well in the event that there is a data breach. I know for me and our agency, we used to use Salesforce, and Salesforce has their coverage as well. But if my client's data is hacked in Salesforce, there's a really good chance that Salesforce isn't going to cover me in the lawsuits that I might be exposed to based on my client's data being exposed. So
the same with payment information. If you read your credit card company, the agreement you have with them, typically if there's any loss of data and you collected it, the credit card company will come after you too. So that's something, another read your agreement instance.
Okay. That's definitely the rule for the day, is read your policy.
Right. We hate to say it, but it's true. It's hard to give, and this is among any lines of insurance, it's hard to give blanket statements of yes, covered, not covered, because there's so many different companies out there. They all have different policy language and exclusions, that it is really important that you work directly with your insurance agent to go through your policies and make sure there's not any surprises, so that way you know what you're buying. Yeah, I mean, I would just emphasize again, if you're storing client data, first and foremost, do anything that you can to protect that data. And secondly, if you're storing that data, it's probably going to be a really good idea to at least research a cyber liability policy in the event that there is a claim.
Okay.
Stock throughput. This is a really cool policy, in my opinion. We're not seeing these policies a ton yet, but I think we will. And basically, this is designed for companies that import, distribute, or export merchandise. And it's going to provide coverage for raw materials, semi-finished materials, and finished product. And it's going to cover the goods at all times, whether in transit, undergoing processing, or in storage at owned or third-party premises. So if you're the cultivator, what you can do is you can buy a stock throughput policy. And this is going to cover your raw material, semi-finished, and finished product, regardless of where it's at. So you grow, while it's growing, it's covered. While it's being transported to the processor, it's covered. On the way to the provisioning center, it's covered. So it's a cool policy. We just aren't seeing a ton of them yet. And I think we will start seeing more and more as things shake out in Michigan with the licensing and who's responsible for what. It's a big conversation that we have with all these secure transporters is, well, yeah, I'm transporting this product, but I don't own it. So why do I have to insure it? So that's one of those gray areas that we're talking to all of our clients about is who's insuring what, at what point does it become my responsibility to insure it versus their responsibility to insure it.
Right.
So this might be one of the products that we see come into play more and more often. And the pros of this is it's better coverage. You can select what coverage you want from point A all the way to point C. The cons are there's not as many carriers that are offering this, and they are higher premiums at this point in time. Hopefully, as more data comes out and we start to see more claims happen, we can get a better idea of the pricing that we should be charging. And so that should be able to lower the premium ideally, but at this point, that's what the negatives are about this policy is the limited amount of carriers and the high cost. So that pretty much wraps up, the insurance required by the state of Michigan for the licensing, the requirements of the state of Michigan in general, and then also some coverages that are not required but are recommended by us. And by most insurance agencies, I would hope. So here's our contact information. Our website has a lot of other great information. It also has an apply online link. If you follow this link right here, it'll take you directly to our website where you can fill in the information and we can submit it off for quoting. It also has mine and Stephanie's email and cell phone numbers. So, that's pretty much wraps up our presentation. I don't know, Jamie, if you have any questions.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, so describe the ideal relationship that a license seeker should have with someone like you or the insurance company. Like what type of line of communication should they have? Like how often should they be in communication with the company?
So as much as I like to think that we are like awesome to talk to and you should talk to us all the time, it should be a very regular basis. We've got some large clients who we're in contact with, I would say, every month. We're talking to them, we're updating, especially in an industry like this that's changing constantly. We are in contact with them and they're in contact with us on a monthly basis as things are changing. Some of our clients that aren't seeing as much change in their business, maybe it can be a quarterly touch-in, a 6-month check-in. I don't ever recommend our clients to go more than a year without talking to us because so much changes. But I would say be in touch as much as you possibly can. You want to make sure that you can get in touch with your insurance agent. You want to make sure that they can come out and see your facility and sit down with you to go through everything on a regular basis. So that would be, to answer your question, like an ideal relationship would be one that you can talk to all the time whenever you need them. They are willing to come out and see your facility, come out and talk to you about your policies.
A lot of the premiums are based on the sales volume also. So everyone's kind of guessing right now, unless you've been established, which isn't that many of the applicants. So as you see what your actual sales are, we can update your premiums. And that's another reason you really need to stay in contact.
Okay. And then, I just really wanted to ask that question because obviously we're entrepreneurs. We get busy. We forget to tell our insurance company about updates, things that have changed within our establishment. And I feel like that if you had that relationship with your insurance provider, it would help that. Yeah. How do you see insurance options changing over the next 12 months in Michigan?
12 months, I don't see a ton of change.
Okay.
Stephanie might disagree, but I don't see a ton of changes happening. In fact, we're seeing carriers pull out of the market that were once writing in the market, and after the Jeff Sessions announcement are actually pulling out. So I don't see it changing.
I don't think even drastically.
Wow.
After that, as the market matures a little bit more, but right now, it is high risk for the companies to get in because they just don't know the numbers yet.
And it is still federally illegal. So, some of these companies are just holding off and not jumping in because of that risk there. But I do see in the next, 5 years, I definitely see changes coming, especially if there's federal changes that take place. But yeah, for the time being, for the immediate future, I don't see anything really changing.
Okay. And that's crazy. I mean, that some companies have pulled out after the Jeff Sessions, because we're thinking that, we're growing this business. This business is growing very, very fast. It's predicted to make 24 billion by 2020. And so you would think that some of those companies are more reluctant to offer solutions for us. But, in reality, some of them are pulling out. The number one lesson we learned today is read your policy.
Yeah.
And just to recap, so you're saying before licensing, so those that are working on their application right now, general insurance or general liability, product liability, and then auto, especially for those that are seeking secure transport licensing.
Right.
Yeah. And then, after those three, after you get your license, then keep that relationship with you, and you guys will help direct them on the different insurance options that they need to be thinking about.
Right. And what
some people are contacting us as well before they do their build out. So they want to know, like, what should I put in for a vault, or does a safe room qualify? And there's different questions that they'll ask us, and we're happy to assist with that too. So they're kind of preparing before they actually need the policy, but that's the point where you should start talking to an agent, is to know what to expect.
And we're doing a lot of proposals for clients who are still in the application process, but a lot of them are doing projections for 12 months out. And it's a lot different to project insurance premiums for a general liability and product liability than it is for all of the coverages that they're going to actually need. So there's a big difference between what the state is mandating and what they actually need as a business owner. So we're happy to work with our clients to, really try and establish the policy that they're going to need, 6 months down the line when they're actually up and operating.
Okay. Well, Amanda, Stephanie, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for answering the questions. We do not have any questions through the webinar. But if you guys have questions, if you're on Facebook, you joined us on Facebook, put your questions in the chat feature. Ladies, if there are questions that pop up, please look at the thread and go back and answer some of those questions that might be there. And we are going to have you ladies on again soon. But thank you for your time today. And there's their contact information. Again, bricksandmortarcannabis.com. Go ahead and reach out to them. They have all the answers you need when it comes to insurance.
Thank you, Jamie.
Okay, thank you. Have a great day. See you next week. Bye.